All right. This is SK Barrett, and you are listening, watching Real Monsters. And we have a special guest tonight, Kelly Evans, to help us talk about that son of a gun Rasputin. Say
That
hello.
that rascal. Hi, how you doing?
Good. Good. Thank you for joining us tonight. Actually, it's just us. Wes is not here. That son of a gun just thought it was okay to be sick this week. I don't know where you got that idea. Um,
Not not allowed. Well, if he hadn't been, then I wouldn't be here. So I can't really say I'm glad he's sick, but um, okay, let's move on.
let's move on. Yeah,
Sorry,
I'm
Wes.
glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. We had such a good time talking about Jack the Ripper.
Oh, I'm glad. Well, he's always a good laugh, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. All right, so uh, I'm going to talk about my book for a minute. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a little bit of um, one of my reviews.
Ooh,
And this is a review that came from Angela Shearer, and she's a South African author and an amazing person. Okay, here it goes. It says, this book is hard hitting, honest, jarring, and brutal, but mostly it is necessary and useful. It will not allow you to remain locked in a contradiction between your dreams and the dead bureaucracies and vain facades of our species. It will bring back the sweetness that is lost in the silence of your paradox. At every turn, it will no longer allow you to suppress and restrain your excitement, hunger, and joy. It will take you by the heart and guide you away from distraction, cynicism, and dysfunctional medication. This book is about the rules we haven't managed to figure out for ourselves. May the rules in this book teach you how to stand in your own sun again. May it encourage those who devour it. Courage, as you know, is a lot like gravity. All it takes is a little push. So
wow,
thank you, Angela, for that.
that was an amazing review
Right? And I'm
and
gonna,
beautiful.
yeah, and I'm gonna post the Amazon link in the chat. Um, yeah, I'm very fortunate to. Um, I have some, not many reviews, but they're all just amazing. I'm very lucky for that.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about this son of a gun,
So
Rasputin.
Rasputin, yeah, everybody knows him, but I think everybody knows maybe a little bit about him, or I think a lot of people have heard of him, but maybe they don't know some of the facts about him, as few as there are. So, for people who do know a little bit about him, I may be pouring some cold water on the facts tonight. I
Yeah,
hate to be that person, but
stupid facts.
I know.
So
Hey, I'm a historian. Okay, so facts are kind of my bread and butter.
I first heard about him, I think, in grade school or junior high school. And it
Really?
was, yeah. And, the mythology, I don't, a lot of what I remember from that introduction um, is false, especially around his death, his
Oh yeah,
assassination. There's a lot of, um,
there are a lot of
a
theories.
lot of, well, a lot of theories. Plus, I remember that it was um, much more elaborate and that he survived many more assaults than actually happened.
Yeah, there's a very large mythology built up around him, in large because after the revolution, the Bolsheviks destroyed a lot of records. So basically, what we have are photographs, bizarrely, a large number of photographs, and a lot of newspaper articles. And the newspapers didn't really like him, so you got to take the newspaper articles with a grain of salt.
Sure. Yeah. Well, he had a few people who liked him and a lot who didn't.
Oh yeah,
So
Tome. Yeah. Well, and there's the first I heard of him, I think was in the '70s, and I don't remember the year, and I don't really want to age myself. But a group called Boney M came out with a song called Rasputin, which was a very brief hit, which was just I still love that song.
well, maybe let's start at the very beginning.
Okay, so let's see. His name is Grigori Rasputin, and he was born a peasant. His father was a peasant farmer, and he was born in Siberia, in a small village in Siberia. So he was illiterate. He was the eighth son, but none of the previous seven had lived either. They all died in childhood or they all died at birth. So he was the first son to survive, which to me means he was like, to this family, he must have been like a golden child. Now, that's my own speculation, and I'll tell you why I'm bringing that up later.
I,
But he
I'm
was first.
on this stream. You'll see I have a map that shows where he was born in relation to the rest
St.
of
Peter's.
Russia, the
Uh,
rest of Russia and Europe and Kazakhstan and all that kind of stuff.
yeah, that's actually good because the map's changed a little bit, so that's kind of cool. So basically, he's known as the Mad Monk or the Black Monk. He was never formally ordained. He wasn't officially a monk. He was just known as like a wandering monk. So he was born in Siberia to a family, a very poor family, illiterate more than likely. We know he couldn't read until later. He There are stories about his childhood. He was accused of this. He was accused of that. He was a bully. He drank. He got into fights. Um, at one point, I think someone claimed that he had left the village because he was a horse thief. There's rumors that his entire family were horse thieves. These Nothing substantiated there. There's just nothing written about whether any of this is true. So, for some reason, when he was 28, and this was after he actually married and had, I believe, he had 4 or 5 children. He decided at the age of 28 that he wanted to be a monk. He just wanted to go and lead a more spiritual life. So he left Siberia and he found a monastery and he joined the monastery, but then decided that the monastery was a little bit too restrictive for him, and he had started coming up with some unorthodox beliefs. And this is where some of the whole sex maniac stuff comes in. He'd started believing that the only way you could attain forgiveness for your sins was to actually indulge in the worst possible sins you possibly could. So the worst sort of debauchery. So
Whoa,
basically,
hold on.
yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Uh, so, I was raised in a fairly conservative religion, and I'm familiar with a wide variety of religions, and this is really the first I've heard about the idea that redemption is dependent on sin, and that you're
Yeah.
supposed to sin so that you can be forgiven. That's really counter to everybody else, pretty much.
Well, yeah, that's why he had certain issues with the Russian Orthodox Church later on. But so he came up with this idea that this is what must be done. But having said that, he did go through a very, very minor, I guess, Orthodox training when he went to the monastery. He wasn't there very long, but at least he had some introduction to it. And while he was there, they also taught him to read and write. And apparently, there was more than one monk who was there with him who was impressed by his interpretation of the scriptures. So he was starting to get himself a religious education. I don't, I haven't found in any research and I haven't found any theories as to why he decided that this course of salvation was the one he was going to take. Now, there was I guess I don't know if I want to call them a cult, a sect at the time,
Hmm.
called the Clisties, and they had a reputation of they met in secret. and they were actually an offshoot of the Russian Orthodox Church, and
Oh.
they actually got themselves into such a they whipped themselves up into such a religious fervor that they would actually end up having orgies. And people said he joined this cult. Apparently, his daughter was later interviewed, and she said that he looked into it, but he never actually became a member of it. But he
Hmm.
may have picked up some ideas from it, i.e., this whole you have to go and you have to actually commit the sin in order for you to be given full forgiveness for it.
Wow, that's just really fascinating because uh, I
He
mean,
was, he
it,
was, yeah, he had some very, very unusual ideas at the time. Um, but the thing was that at the time, also, the aristocracy were very, very interested in a number of things. So it's kind of a confluence of events. So they were interested in the peasantry. So this can be reflected in like Fabergé was in Moscow was producing art that reflected a long tradition of peasantry, peasant myths and mythology and all that kind of stuff. There was
hmm,
also there was also mysticism. Everybody was going nuts about mysticism and
right.
the occult. And here's this
And
guy.
not just there. It was in the U.S. It was in
It was
Europe.
yeah, yeah, it was everywhere. It was around the same time as Arthur Conan Doyle was, trying to prove the fairies and getting into that. And I think in the states, who was it?
Houdini.
Houdini was going around trying to debunk all of the stuff that was going on because he was pretty anti it. Except that he kept seeing his mom's ghost, so I don't know about him. Um, anyway, yeah. So the occult was big business. So here's this guy who's had this massive religious conversion who a lot of accounts claim he said he could do miracle cures ever since he was a child. He had very unorthodox ways of viewing things. He had learned to read and write in a remarkably quick amount of time, so the man obviously had some brains.
Right.
And he was now sort of like the favorite of some of the European royalty, especially in Montenegro, which is how we got introduced to the Tsar and Tsarina in Russia. So he walks into this atmosphere where here's this mysterious man who could do mysterious healings. Everybody likes the occult. Oh, he's also from Siberia. He's a peasant. Oh, isn't that cute and quaint? Let's get him in.
Hmm.
Um, he also had his physical appearance. So when he came back from the monastery, he had decided he grew his beard, he grew his hair, he wore dark robes. He was 6'3", so he was very, very tall. He was much taller than the czar at the time. So when he walked into a room, he
He
drew everybody's attention.
because he was
So
his physical presence.
yeah, his physical presence, and you've seen the pictures of his eyes. He just had eyes that could look like they could just like stare right through you.
Hmm. Yeah, he must have had some charm as well.
Apparently, yeah, apparently he was very, very charismatic. So, for whatever reason, either he grew up because he was the first child, and son who had survived. He may have had a little bit of a coddled upbringing if he was the first one. They may have made him feel like he was the most important son in the family, which is why
Hmm.
I brought up the other children having died. So he may have been brought up with a healthy ego, in other words. And then he had other monks when he went. He learned reading and writing in a short period of time, which would have been remarkable given his upbringing. He had monks that were interested in the way he was interpreting things, so he probably got attention there. And if he had the healthy ego, it had to have grown.
Yeah, yeah, that would just, you know, feed into that, right? I mean,
Exactly. Yeah. So if you've already got this ego and you've already got this physical presence and you've already got the reputation of being a bit of a mystic and you've already wandered around the forests of Siberia for a good few years because of a religious conversion and you're a peasant, you pretty much check all the boxes for Russian royalty.
fascinating. I did not know that about their interest in the peasantry. Was it like uh, what could I call it? Kind of a fashionable thing to
Yeah,
show interest?
it depended on where you were in Russia, actually. And again, this is based on my knowledge of like Fabergé and the art he was creating for the royal family. So if you're in St. Petersburg, there was very much a European feel, which is how Rasputin probably got introduced to the family. They were in St. Petersburg. He was introduced through European royalty, and Fabergé was making all these wonderful things for the St. Petersburg crowd. But over in Moscow, there was this huge thing about Russian peasantry and Russian myths and Russian legends. And again, Fabergé made a whole different set of objects for this market, and they're completely different than anything you wouldn't guess they were Fabergé. They're so different, but so beautiful. And a little bit of that had sort of started trickling over into the St. Petersburg market. So they were starting to get into the peasantry and the mythology and things like that. They were kind of harkening back to the olden days when, old imperial Russia. And also at this time, the Romanovs had been in power for 300 years.
Oh,
So they were a well established family. Um, Again, the background to him entering this situation, not just him, but with the Romanovs themselves, they were extremely privileged family. They were living opulent, just obscenely opulent lives when there'd been a number of years of bad harvests. People were starving. There was a lot of arguing between the church and the politicians. People weren't really confident in the czar. Up till that point, there hadn't been a male heir. There'd only been female heirs, so that was another worry heaped on top. And World War I was brewing. So he walked into this. It's just a perfect storm.
what do you mean there hadn't been male heirs?
Well, up until a few years before Rasputin came on the scene with the Russian Tsar and the Tsarina, there'd only been females born. She'd only had girls,
Oh,
and they
oh,
needed
oh, oh, so, okay,
they needed a male heir. It was a premature thing. Um, so she actually, the princess actually went to the Tsarina. Sorry, went to. She consulted mystics and she begged them to do something about the fact that she'd only had females up at the girls up until that point.
hmm,
Now there were stories that say Rasputin was introduced to her because she needed a male heir and he sort of somehow made it happen through mystical means. Other stories have him coming after the male Alexei was born. So again, it's all speculation. But eventually her faith in the mystical grew because she had her son. Now
gotcha.
the son was born ill. He was born with hemophilia, which is a clotting disease. And even though they'd already met Rasputin, he really came to prominence because the child hurt himself. He cut his knee, and because of the hemophilia, he was not healing. It was just bleeding, and he would have bled out. It basically you just do not stop bleeding.
Right.
They somehow basically the Montenegrin princesses had introduced Rasputin, so they got in touch with him, and he prayed over the boy. But one of the most important things he did, and everybody thinks it's all mystical, but he got the doctors to stop treating the child. Now, the doctors at the time gave aspirin for everything. Like
Oh,
every
that
ailment you
that
had, they gave you aspirin. So, yeah, by telling the doctors not to give him aspirin, they probably helped with stopping the bleeding because aspirin thins your
right
blood.
thins your blood. Right. That's why you take it for, well, for heart conditions, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I take what, 80 milligrams a day or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at the time, they were doing the absolute worst thing they possibly could for him and give him aspirin.
Well, it was kind of the miracle drug of the day, right?
Well, yeah,
Aspirin.
like no matter what, the kid had a fever because of his hemophilia, because of all the bleeding, because he wasn't clotting. So they gave him aspirin. You could anything. Anything. You have a cut, give you aspirin. You got asthma, give you aspirin. It's like yeah, it was the
Right.
miracle drug at the time.
Right. And so he, from what I read, he was back at home in Siberia, and the Tsarina um, sent him a telegram.
This was actually a second time that he supposedly
Oh,
miraculous.
okay. This was
So basically, yeah, he got more and more prominent at court, especially after supposedly curing the little Alexei, and he started sort of muscling his way in. He started advising the czar on who he should hire for for the politicians, for the council. It's called the Doma. He started anybody who was anti-Rasputin. He would put a bug in the czar's ear or the czarina's ear, and that person would be gone. Um, and then he went back to Siberia, his village, and the Alexei got he managed to, I'm not sure, he hurt himself because of a carriage ride, a very rough carriage ride or something. So this kid must have been very delicate. So the
Yeah.
Tsarina sent, yeah, she sent the telegram to him. While he was there, actually, he was in hospital recovering from a very vicious stab wound. They weren't even sure he was going to survive.
Oh, was
Um,
this when during the assassination attempt at his?
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So one of the old priests that he used to be sort of friends with had turned against him, and actually referred to him as the Antichrist because he just did not agree with any of Rasputin's views. He also didn't agree with how close he was getting to, to power. So he kind of hired this ex prostitute to go and stab, to kill him. She managed to stab him in the stomach a number of times. He went to the hospital and he miraculously survived. So this is another sort of, a mystical thing in his favor. He survived this terrible attack. But yeah,
mythology building.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So this was he wasn't supposed to live, but oh look, he survived. Um, but yeah, in the meantime, Alexei had fallen again. He was bleeding. He was feverish. They didn't think he would make it. So she sent a telegram to him, and he replied saying, don't worry about it. Calm down. Keep the doctors away from him. He actually said that,
Yeah.
and said, your son won't die. And within a few days, he had actually started to recover. But see, once again, he kept the doctors away who were giving the kid aspirin. But it came out as he's a magic man because
Right.
he healed the heir to the throne again
From a distance, no less.
from a distance. I know. So this
Right.
guy's got to be some big kudos at court. So when he did come back, that was pretty much it. Um, Now World War I was looming, and the Tsar, the general that was leading the effort, the Russian effort, was Rasputin's enemy. So Rasputin
Mm.
had him dismissed, which meant the Tsar had to go out to the front and lead the troops himself, which left him and the Tsarina to pretty much rule Russia.
Well,
You
that
can
was
imagine,
kind of a double win for him, right?
yeah, you can imagine how that went.
I mean, he gets rid of an enemy and he gets rid of the czar, so he has just total control. I don't know control, but he has unimpeded influence
Pretty
over
much.
the Tsarina and Alexei.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was actually very, very good friends with all the daughters as well. Not only that, because he kind of slept around, he had slept with everybody's wife. So if you were in the army, if you were a high up ranking official, if you were some member of the royalty, he probably slept with your wife. So every one of
Oh,
these
that's
women,
gotta go over big.
well, I was saying, so all the men were pissed off with him, but every one of these women who were just enamored by this guy were now bugging their husbands on his behalf. So his web just went everywhere.
Mm.
He just had, his fingers in, sorry, everybody's pie. I started saying that
But
and I thought,
bum.
no. so
Oh, well said.
so basically, it all started going horribly wrong when the Tsar is up at the front with the Russian troops, and he's left with the Tsarina, and basically he replaces the entire government. He just gets rid of anybody who says anything bad about him. So now we've got a government, and they're and I hate to make this sound like modern politics, but it's a guy who's basically put all of his friends in positions of responsibility, and none of them can do their jobs properly because they
Ah.
have no experience doing it. So one by one, various government institutions start to fall apart, as you might be able to actually readily imagine happening.
Right.
Um, and the peasants, the population started getting angry because none of the services were working, none of the food was there, everybody was starving, there was no health care, there was nothing for these people because the government had pretty much collapsed. So on top of
Oh,
this,
and in the meantime, Nicholas was a shitty general.
he was a bad general. He was just an incredibly bad general, and they just kept sending more people to the front. They didn't. They just didn't. Yeah, it was just a disaster. So it was the perfect confluence turning into the perfect disaster. Um, so the czars. Let me just think about this now. The czars. I think it's the czar's step nephew. He decided enough is enough. There were newspaper articles making fun of royalty. There were some really crude pictures in all of the newspapers, like all of the tabloids making fun of the royalty. People hated the royalty now because of the level it had got to. People were not confident in Nicholas because he was a terrible general. None of the government was working. The church was coming down heavy and on royalty for following in with this mad monk, as well as Rasputin. So it was just a huge disaster. So um, the Tsar's nephew decided enough is enough, and he took matters into his own hands. He sent a letter to Rasputin, purportedly from his wife, who supposedly had a sex addiction. He said, and the letter was basically, please come and see me. I need your help with my sex addiction. I need a cure. So of course, yeah, he's going to refuse a note like that. Um, he arrives at the house, the prince's house, and he's shown downstairs. And he's told that the wife is upstairs. She's just finishing off with some guests because they had a party. Have some cakes, have some wine. They'll be down in a minute. Now, this is where reports vary. Now, some people say he drank the wine, ate the cakes. Some people said he refused to. Some people said he had some of the cakes and then later on asked for the wine. But apparently, all of it was laced with arsenic. Um, so that's one part of the story. So supposedly, let's go with
Right.
the worst case. He ate the wine, he drank the wine, he ate the cakes. Nothing happened. So Prince Felix is now doubly angered. He gets a gun. He runs upstairs. He gets a gun. He comes downstairs and he shoots Rasputin in the stomach. Rasputin falls and does not move. So Felix is like, okay, I've killed the guy. He runs back upstairs, dresses up like Rasputin in his coat and his hat, drives to Rasputin's house, pretending to be him. So if anybody asks, they can say, oh, yeah, we saw Rasputin leave at, 2 o'clock in the morning. Comes back to his house, goes downstairs and checks on Rasputin. And Rasputin all of a sudden jumps up at him and starts choking him. So he grabs a gun again. This time, no, sorry. Rasputin starts choking him, screams at him, and then runs from the building or crawls from the building or somehow manages to get out onto the courtyard. So the conspirators, Prince Felix and his friends, go out, take a gun. This time they shoot him in the head and a number of times in the stomach, and he's dead. That's it. They wrap his body up and they throw him into the river. By this point, police have arrived because they've heard the gunshots. People have seen what's happened. So Prince Felix doesn't even deny it. First, he says he did it because no, he did. He says he did it because he was ashamed of how low the royalty had fallen, and then he claimed he did it for Russia because Russia was falling, etc., etc. But that's pretty much the facts of his death. Some people claim that when his body was recovered a few days later, he had water in his lungs, which suggests he was alive.
Hmm.
There was nothing in the autopsy that showed any water at all. So it looks like he was dead when he was in the water.
Right. And um, one of the stories that I heard in my first the first time I heard about him was that they had found his fingers were, worn to the bone from trying to claw through the ice.
Yeah,
That was one of the stories.
I've heard that one too.
But
I've heard it
clearly
as
he
a
was
story.
dead, right?
Yeah, I've heard it as a story, but I didn't see anything when you look through some of the notes regarding the autopsy report. I didn't see it in there. Now, I don't. Okay, so is this like a family friendly podcast? Because
Nope.
we're going to get into something that everybody asks me when we start talking about
Oh,
Rasputin.
I know what you're gonna say. Yes. Yes.
Did they cut
It's
off?
yeah, please, you can talk about
Yeah,
it.
did they cut it off or didn't they? There's okay. So there's a museum in Moscow. It's a museum of sex and erotica, who claim to have Rasputin's penis. I don't know if you saw the picture of it. If it is his, I mean, well done, sir. Um, but the thing is, okay, so when the autopsy was done, the genitals were attached, definitely.
Right.
When he was buried, apparently the genitals were attached. Now, there was apparently a guy in America who claimed that he'd got it. He found it with a bunch of notes from Rasputin's daughter. That ended up being a sea cucumber. So, no.
Ah,
The guy that actually has it will not tell anybody where he got it from. He will not reveal where it came from. So you can make of that what you wish.
yeah. No
they've set up a huge
provenance.
they've set up a huge display. You have to ask about it. It's in a back room, and apparently, like you go through the whole museum, and it's not very exciting. Well, I suppose it is exciting depending on your point of view. Um, but you kind of have to ask. And then you go into this curtained room, and they have a huge display where you walk around, and there's clues all over the room as to what might have happened. And in the middle of the display, there's like this little set of curtains that you have to press a button, and the curtains open, displaying in all its glory the Willy. But
I
yeah, the
did
guy
I did
will
not
not.
run across that image in my search.
Oh, I don't go look. It's just
No.
not. It's just a big Willy in a jar. I don't know. It's just weird. But if it is his, whoever cut it off did a really sloppy job because they just got more than just that bit. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. Um,
If anybody's watching this live right now, I'm clear your Google history because Rasputin's penis on your Google history. I'm sure your family want to see that.
so many of our listeners are writers, and that would
Yeah,
probably not even rank among the top 20 weird
yeah,
searches.
yep. Okay, yeah, I forgot about that. Sorry, I
Yeah.
forgot who I was talking to.
Um, and also, we talk about, awful people on this show. That's the whole point. But
Well, I
there was
one of my
also, go
one of
ahead.
my hit Google histories was on the stages of human decomposition, and I actually found a couple of body farms in Ontario, and I was so tempted to visit them. But
Oh,
anyway, moving.
fascinating.
I
Yeah.
know, I know, seriously, but we could only talk about that here, not in normal society.
Yeah, Catherine Coulter, I think, has a book called The Body Farm.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
just purely from a writing research point of view. But anyway, I've it's just get back to our boy Rasputin.
Yeah, this guy. So he was shot. The autopsy says he was also shot in the forehead, and
Yeah,
there
he
was
was
a
basically
stab wound.
so basically he was shot. They reckon the timeline was he was shot in the stomach, and that didn't kill him. Although I know gut wounds, like from previous research, I know how bad gut wounds are. Um, I guess so. I guess he must have passed out, and by the time Prince Felix came back, he'd recovered his senses, and he sort of managed to crawl out into the courtyard. So we know that happened.
Hmm.
Um, and the timeline seems to fit it with when you put together the time when he went to his house and came back again, etc. Now, what happened in the courtyard? I The timeline says he got shot in the head first, and that killed him immediately. So that makes sense with the rest of it because the other guys then pulled out their guns and they all shot. So there were actually four of them. So Prince Felix put the bullet into his stomach first. When he crawled outside, Prince Felix was the one that shot him in the head, and then his three other guys shot him in the stomach numerous times.
Wow. And he was
But
stabbed.
and I don't
There's a,
remember.
there's a picture of the autopsy photos with a stab wound in the side.
Was he also stabbed? Okay, it was probably one of the four guys then.
Yeah. So they
And
were they were pretty upset with him.
well, I'm pretty sure that he slept with at least one of their wives. So,
At least, yeah.
so as much as you want to be all go Russia, and I'm doing this for Russia and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure there was a little bit of personal motive involved. There had to be. Come on, they're human.
Right. And you know, these were not peasants. These were the elite
Yeah,
of
this
this.
was. I think Prince Felix was married to um, uh, Tsar Nicholas's niece, so he was a step nephew. So I just refer to him as a nephew. But he
Right.
was called. He was part of the royal family.
Right. My point is that, the men may well and very likely stepped out on their wives, but the reverse was not allowed.
Well, isn't that kind of still kind of
Right?
yeah, hasn't it been like that
That's
for like
yeah.
thousands of years?
But I mean, especially true amongst the elites, right? And that kind of thinking, trickles down to the population as a whole, but it starts with those people at the top, you know.
I don't know. When you think of some of the French elite and how I think the queens were allowed, sort of permitted to have their lovers as long as the husband didn't wasn't reminded of it or in any way. So I think I think there were some rules. Now I know that was the French church. That was like depending on which church you're under. I'm my assumption is Russian Orthodoxy is a little bit more strict with regard to that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm going to assume what you said. There should be specific rules for the royalty.
Right.
But then him sleeping around was one of the reasons that people were so upset with the royalty. They were so disgusted by the royal family because of the debauchery. That basically he was dragging their name through the mud.
And this was not uh, um, they weren't very good at keeping it secret. They didn't care, right?
Oh, no, the police actually they couldn't investigate him directly because he was so close to the Tsar and Tsarina. They put up a 24-hour watch outside of his luxurious house in St. Petersburg, and he hired two or three prostitutes a day, and they just come to his house. Like, so he wasn't keeping any secrets from them.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and yeah, and the sleeping with the wives, obviously everybody knew about it.
Yeah, it was an open secret. I mean, the newspapers were constantly making references to it. I don't know if you have all the pictures that we found when you were looking through this, but there's some pretty interesting pictures from the actual newspapers of the time that were just making fun of the whole situation.
I did not see those newspaper pictures, but
There's one pretty scathing one that I think it shows Rasputin as a sort of a large figure, and it shows the Tsarina and the Tsar as like his puppets.
oh
Um,
yes, yes,
it
yes.
actually shows him basically just running the entire country. That was the opinion of quite a few people back then, which is why they hated him so much.
So the Bolshevik Revolution happened just a few months after his assassination.
I think about a year after, because I know the Romanovs were executed in 19 and
17?
1917, and he died in 1916, I think, in December. So yeah, actually, it was just yeah, it would have been a few months after, yeah.
Yeah, so
And it's funny though because one of the predictions he made when he was in with the Tsar and the Tsarina, he said if any member of the Romanov family actually kills me, then that'll be the end of the Romanov family. Like if any member of your family, if I end up dead because of any of your family, the family has 2 years and that'll be it. And it ended up coming true.
I'm showing that cartoon right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that actually happened.
Yeah.
Um,
And
you know,
because that happened, he sort of like he foretold his death, and he was constantly feeling like the 6 months before he died, he kind of had a feeling his death was coming, and all of this stuff. There just been so many movies and so many books and so many plays and just about Rasputin being this mystical guy. But I think when you break him down into human elements,
hmm
he was a very clever man. He came from a very poor background. He had a very healthy ego, and I believe he must have had that right from childhood. And he took advantage of every situation he possibly could.
and he was you know, he was a sex addict. That's
He
what
was,
we would call it now.
I mean, he obviously had some sort of medical training because he knew about the aspirin and the bleeding.
Hmm.
So he was smart. We'll give him credit where credit's due. He was a very smart man. He was very, very astute. Um, he was also very manipulative. He, yeah, was a sex addict completely. He had some very weird religious views. I actually believe that he was religious. I think he believed the things he believed, and I think he believed in God.
Hmm.
But he just was just a weird, weird man.
And so, what are the opinions on his influence on the Bolshevik Revolution? How much did his behavior, his influence on the royal family, uh, and his control over them? How much did all of that play into the Bolshevik Revolution?
Well, if you look at the different elements, so we've already got the peasant, the people not happy. They're already hungry. There's already been, numerous harvest failures and
Hmm.
droughts and all that kind of stuff. Um, Rasputin directly contributed to Nicholas being at the front because he got the general removed,
All
and
right.
he suggested to Nicholas, "You go and take control." Um, Whether he knew Nicholas was a poor leader or not, we don't know. He may have done, but he directly. I don't know. See, he was very anti-war. It's the weird thing about. So maybe he thought Nicholas would actually be effective out there. I don't know because is he was definitely Rasputin was definitely anti-war. He was very
Hmm.
pro peace. Um, okay, so he sent Nicholas out, whether for good or bad. That didn't work out, so that contributed to the reputation of the royalty. He had complete control over the government because he placed all of his friends in there, so that contributed. All of the people he placed, his friends, were completely ineffectual, so all of the government institutions started falling apart, which also contributed. So yeah, I think weight of evidence, you can say he yeah directly contributed to the revolution.
Hmm. Yeah, because everything he did just pissed people off.
Yeah, really. I mean, he had devotees, and he had devotees that actually continued on after his death. And there were little pockets of them around Europe, and like the little pockets of royalty and things that escaped Russia. Um, I don't know. It was his charisma. It might have been because his sexual prowess. I don't know. But he did have like this little cult of people, men and women, who followed him around, um, and did after his death. But yeah, I think you can say that there was just people. Enough was enough. There was already enough dry kindling sitting around. All it needed was a spark, and I think you can say Rasputin was probably that very large spark.
Wow. How about that?
I
That's pretty impressive for a guy from a tiny village in Siberia
know,
who
right?
was illiterate until well into adulthood.
If he weren't such a freak, and if he didn't, if it hadn't gone so disastrously wrong, he would almost be like for something for writers to admire. It's like if this guy can do it, you can do it, but
Right,
maybe not.
right.
maybe
But
not the maybe not the best role model, but seriously, if God, if a peasant from Siberia can do it, I mean, look what he did.
well, and he could have, with a slight detour, had started his own church probably, right?
Yeah, can you imagine if he put all of that energy into like solving the problems and actually helping? I mean, we can't get into his head. He's got, I think, some writings from his daughter. Um, Maybe he thought he was doing the right thing. Okay, let's play devil's advocate. Maybe he thought, honest to God, that everything he was doing was absolutely the right thing for Russia. We've seen it in modern politics.
Hmm.
It happens a lot. It's happened throughout history. There are a lot of English kings who absolutely thought they were doing the right thing, but just managed to just screw it all up completely.
Sure.
So it, maybe he thought he was doing the right thing, and it all just went horribly wrong. Um, except for the little personality things like the sex, I don't know. It's just kind of hard to reconcile. It's kind of hard to reconcile some bits of his personality with the yeah, he was really a swell guy.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, we've had modern cults built around sex. So they tend to be pretty small though.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying this guy had a cult in the millions. I mean, he certainly had.
No, no, no. I'm not saying I'm saying he mm, eh. What I'm saying if his life had detoured just slightly at some point,
Yeah,
he could have gone on to establish his own church.
yeah, he might have done. I don't know. I mean, the Russian Orthodox Church was pretty powerful at the time, and they were also heavily involved in the politics of the time, which was
Ah,
another reason for the revolution, which I just didn't get into. Um, like for example, another reason was the Tsarina was actually she was born in Germany, and
right.
one of the friends that Rasputin put in place was also German. So there was a very anti-German sentiment at the time because of the war and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a bunch of other little things going on. But anyway, um, And now I've lost where we were
Well,
going.
he would have supplanted the church's influence
Oh,
at
yeah,
court,
yeah.
right?
Well,
I mean, they would have not been
remember,
happy about that.
remember, it was one of the monks that had initially been impressed with him that tried to arrange his murder the first time. So I
Well,
don't. I
yeah.
mean, the guy had been exiled for speaking out against Rasputin, but that was by the politicians and the royalty, not by the church. So the church could have sanctioned some sort of intervention. I don't know. I that's a whole other topic about church and interventions. Political interventions in the church. That's a dissertation right there.
Right. Um,
But yeah, my point is they were very powerful. So I don't know. He might have been able to get a pretty good because there might have been people. There's people today disillusioned with their religion. Maybe there were people back then disillusioned with how strict the church was, and he offered a different way. So yeah, it could have happened.
right. Well, there was that sect that he was suspected of having joined, the
Yeah, the
uh,
Clisti.
Clisti, right? So
Yeah,
something like that, right?
yeah. But his daughter said that he investigated them and then decided they were just too much for him and didn't like the fact that they what do you call it, like self flagellation, they like
Right.
hit them, and they had the orgies and he didn't actually like the orgies or the flagellation, so that's why he decided not to join them, which is surprising, but yeah. And also at the time they drank a lot, and at that time he actually didn't drink. He was very, very anti-alcohol. He only started
Until he was stabbed, right?
until after he was stabbed. Yeah, and apparently that experience changed him, and then he started drinking after that, and apparently heavily.
I'm gonna go with, again, we don't know what was going on in his head. I'm gonna go with the idea that um, he wasn't thinking about what was best for Russia, but what was best for Rasputin.
Yeah, but I can't imagine anybody would do things on purpose that would bring down the downfall of an entire monarchy, an entire country. I mean that seems really drastic. That's like Lex Luthor evil.
Right.
um,
I don't think he intended those things to happen. I think it was a result of the fact that he wasn't thinking about the effect on the country.
so he was just being incredibly selfish, and it just
Yeah,
went to another. He was being selfish at exactly the wrong time.
exactly. And you know, just hyper indulgent.
Oh yeah, but see that goes back. See, sorry, I'm so enjoying psychoanalyzing people that aren't around anymore.
They
Um,
they can't argue.
I know. Tell me about it. Next, call me back sometime to do this. I'm loving it. Um, but when you think about it, we going back to his childhood, and sorry to Freudians out there or Jungians, um, he was the first kid that survived. He must have been a cherished child in a peasantry that had a farm and was obviously going to need someone to take over running the farm. Now, the fact that he didn't and later grew up and didn't do it, neither here nor there.
Right,
But the first child, and he's a son to survive, they must have really, really, really loved this kid.
right.
So, so that he must have grown up with that ego.
Well, whether they
Uh,
loved him or not, they valued him.
they valued him. Yeah, he was. I think he was incredibly important, and I think he had this ego. And I think if maybe his siblings hadn't have died, maybe he'd been a second or third child. He
Hmm.
may not have grown up the same way. He might have gone to the church. He might have become a monk, and that might have been the end of it.
Right.
Um,
A
but
lot.
yeah,
That's what a lot of second, third sons did, right?
yeah, yeah. Or he would have worked on the family farm. It was they were peasant farmers, so they would have
Hmm.
needed everybody on the farm to work.
Right. But he wouldn't have inherited anything.
No, probably not. No, I don't know exactly what property they had, but I don't think they had. I mean, they're referred to as peasant farmers in every document, so um, don't think they owned very much.
Yeah, not much. But uh, do you know if Russia? I know that in a lot of places in Europe, um, all the any property that there is goes to the oldest son, and nobody else gets anything. That was how it was for centuries,
Yeah,
millennia in Europe. Was
yeah.
Russia the same way? Do you know?
I think it was. I know we don't like to use the word feudalism anymore and that sort of thing, but I think the feudalist system actually continued into Russia until fairly recently compared to the rest of Europe. Um, so yeah, I would imagine. I'm not 100% certain though.
Yeah. Well, okay, so it would be not surprising if that was the case.
No, it wouldn't be. But then if the land didn't belong to them, there wouldn't be anything to
A-
inherit.
Anyway,
Anyway, yeah. So peasant.
except maybe the right to work it.
Exactly, yeah. So if it was still based roughly on a feudalist system, then the land would have been owned by someone and they would have been working on it. And you're right, the right to work that parcel of land would have gone on to the eldest son, or if there was enough land, if you got lucky enough to be working enough land, it might have been split into parcels between the sons.
Hmm.
But no, but what we do know about them is that none of them were literate. So not only were they not well, I don't want to say successful enough farmers to have, they didn't have the spare time to send any, like they were working all their lives. They didn't,
Yeah.
their parents couldn't send them to school to learn anything, not even through a church school. And they didn't send Rasputin to learn, so they couldn't afford it, or they just needed him to work at home. So it shows the level. Plus, the village, you've seen where it is. You showed the map. Siberia was just like Russia times 10. It was just one of the worst places you could possibly live.
Right. It's brutal conditions.
So
Most
to
of
be a
Russia is that way, right?
well, it's yeah. Well, I don't know.
I
There's
mean,
some beautiful,
large
but
swaths of Russia
yeah,
are very difficult to survive
yes,
in.
yeah. There's a lot of the northern stuff. So Siberia, and it was always had the reputation of just, it's where the not very nice people went. And so if you're living there and you're surviving there, then one, you've got to be tough as nails, and two, you're not successful enough to get yourself out of that situation. Or at least you haven't
Right.
been for a couple of generations. So the poverty must have been just incredible.
Right. There's really no mechanism in place economically to better yourself enough to escape, right?
No, not really, unless you do what Rasputin did and somehow send money home, which it doesn't look like he did because he kept going home to visit. If he did send money home or did somehow send something to his family, they didn't move. They stayed in the same place. He never moved his wife and children out of their village. They stayed there for the rest of his life. Like they outlived his wife outlived him, and she never moved. So he, for whatever reason, either he wasn't sending money home or he just wasn't actually getting any money from them. It was all favors. I don't know.
Oh,
Everybody stayed where they were.
he did have bribe money, right? He got bribe money.
Yeah, but he really hired a lot of prostitutes.
Oh, well, you know,
So I don't know. I like.
that'll take care of any disposable income and then
I'm not
some.
sure. Yeah, I'm not sure you can submit your expense report to the Tsar of Russia with candy and sweetie
Kiki
and
and Bambi.
Kiki and Bambi. Yeah, they're my massage therapists. Honest.
Right.
So I'm
Y-
assuming he had to pay for this stuff himself. Plus, he did throw some pretty lavish parties as well.
But he actually lived with some of the women, right? I
Yeah,
mean, he
when their
didn't.
husbands are yeah, especially when their husbands were away fighting.
Yeah.
Yeah, he would move in. He would just move right in, make himself comfortable.
Wow. So I mean, you gotta give the guy, he had a lot of guts. He had a lot of
Well,
balls, right?
the
to,
other
to
thing,
do the shit he did.
well, the other thing is that the guy never bathed.
Oh
He
my
never,
God.
he didn't wash his clothes. He would go, apparently, there was something written down about he wore the same underwear for 10 months.
Oh, Jesus.
He didn't wash his hair. Apparently, he always had food in his beard. And I'm like, I don't understand. I don't get it.
Must have, he must have had a pretty good sized dick. That's all. I mean, come
Well,
on.
the only thing I can say is go look for the picture. You have to go and deliberately Google it, I think, because
I'm gonna not.
it's bizarre. It's yeah, someone okay, so okay, just not to get too graphic, and this is really a weird conversation, but one of the royalty visited it or something and said she thought it was a pony's.
Ah,
Okay, so that should be enough of a visual for you.
right, right.
um, but it's just the thing is, okay, so you know how vampires are supposed to be really, really, really good in bed? Like they have like this reputation of being like supernaturally good. If a vampire just makes you vomit or gag because he smells so bad, you're not going to get to the bed part. And that's what I don't understand. How these women could like did they spray him with perfume or like I
Ah,
don't get it.
right. They wear, you know, bandanas or something over their face, or
Apparently his breath was just terrible as well. Like you could smell it when he walked in the room. But because he of his I don't know, because of his mesmerizing personality and his eyes. Apparently everybody goes on about his eyes.
so, which brings up another thing that may be related. There were some suggestions that he used hypnosis.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen those. I think it's part of the mystique. It's hard to tell. There's nothing written down that said he ever used it. There's nothing in that like there's nothing.
Well, who would write it down if you
Well,
think
that's true.
about it?
No one wants to be hypnotized, do they? No one wants to
Well,
admit they've been
would you
hypnotized.
even know it necessarily?
Okay, well, so that's like that thing, you know, that stupid thing like, oh, you swallow five spiders every night when you're asleep. Well, how do you know you're asleep?
Right,
Well, how do you know he hypnotized people? Like if,
right.
um, I don't know. I don't go with it.
It explained how they put up with him, though.
Well, well, you know what? Actually, thinking about it, he knew about medicine. We established this already because he knew that
He knew about
um
aspirin. Did he
he
roofie
knew that
him?
well well yeah actually I was actually yeah he knew about the aspirin. He knew about
Yeah.
the blood clotting in the aspirin, so he obviously knew more than the doctors. Maybe he knew about some sort of other pharmacological thing you put in drinks, and I don't know,
Like a
to make
hallucinogenic something, or
well, something not something to knock you out completely, but something to make you more to make your the person you're after more susceptible, so
mm-hmm.
that when you do actually have sex with them, they remember it as such a mystical experience. Is there anything like that? Like, does LSD do that or anything?
I does what?
I don't know anything about drugs. Sorry, I
Oh,
said does LSD do that kind of thing? I'm going to
yeah.
sound like a complete idiot now.
Right. So the thing about hallucinogenics, like mushrooms, so mushrooms could have been a thing, right?
Absolutely, yep.
Um, Not peyote. That's indigenous to the
That
Southwest.
it would have been something. So mushrooms could have been. He knew about. Okay, so willow bark. Aspirin is based on willow bark. So
Yeah,
he
white
knew
willow. Yeah.
he knew about the salicylic acid in that. It's likely he knew about other plants.
And so I was at a few years ago. I attended a post Burning Man celebration with some friends who had been to Burning Man, and
Okay.
yeah, that was quite interesting. Um, and my friend who I met up with there um, took some, ate some mushrooms,
Yeah.
and it was really easy to suggest hallucinations to him, which was,
Seriously. So
yeah,
hang
it
on. So
was
like,
really entertaining, by the way.
so what? Like he'd be sitting there, and you'd say, "Oh, look, there's a giant bear in front of you," and he'd see a giant bear.
Yeah. Well, one of the
God.
things I actually said is, he's walking around and he's tripping out and seeing stuff and can't stop talking. And I said, "Can you see the air?" And he stops and he goes, "Oh, I totally can see the air."
Oh my God. That's hilarious.
So yeah, that's a thing.
Okay, so I think that's a new theory that we have just come up with.
Yeah,
Do we have to, do we copyright it or trademark it or something?
it's all yours.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Just a tribute, the origin of the idea.
Well, I did. Yeah, I was kind of going through the drawn out medical explanation, but you just jumped in right with roofie. So,
Yeah, so it would not surprise me if, wherever he learned his medical training, probably in the monastery,
yeah.
that they would include, obviously you can't just know about the helpful drugs. You have to know about the poisons, the deadly things, the stuff to avoid, and
Well,
that
well,
kind
the
of
other
stuff.
well, the other thing is with medicine is sometimes the poisonous stuff, if used in small quantities, is very beneficial. So he would have known a lot if he had picked up this, and yeah, he had to have done it because he knew about the aspirin. How do you know about that?
Right.
So yeah, no, I think this is a good theory. I think this is pretty solid. And it would be easy enough to check because all we'd have to do is go back to through the history, and it's not far back because when I have to research things from Anglo-Saxon times, you have to go back nearly 2,000 years,
Right.
or sorry, 1,000 years. But you just go back like what 100 years, research the monastery, check and see if they had a medical, wing, and bang, there you go.
Yeah, and he might very well have discovered that, you don't need a high dosage.
Yeah,
So it's not like they would be seeing dragons and shit
and
necessarily.
plus he was the mystical thing. He could have been taking some of it himself, and
Right.
been a little bit sort of trancy, but not mega trancy, and that would have just added to the way that he presented himself.
Right.
Huh? This is very interesting. I love
Cracked
this
the
show.
mystery of Rasputin right here on Real Monsters.
I love this show. Awesome. Okay, next. What do we solve next? Loch Ness monster. Come on, let's do this.
Oh, Loch Ness, man. That's too easy. It's just completely impossible.
Oh, what? Oh no, you don't believe what? Oh,
It's
that's
not
so
a
just.
yes, it just the food chain just doesn't support the existence of a creature that size.
Do you know how big the loch is, though? And do you know that actually underground it actually connects to other locks through underground waterways?
Yeah, but there's not enough biomass, is what I'm saying, to
Maybe
support
it's
a
okay.
creature of that size.
So maybe okay. So you know how everything back in like the Pleistocene area used to be really big, even the plants and butterflies and all the
Right?
bugs and everything was huge. And now we have like similar creatures, but everything's actually
Oh,
shrunk
you
in
think we
size.
have toy size?
I think that potentially anything under there that's left over from Jurassic or Cretaceous or whatever period the thing comes from may have over millions of years shrunk down to fit its environment like a goldfish does.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there might be a little baby dinosaur under there. And
Okay,
that's
so
it.
that's that's reasonable, but
I do try.
a monster-sized dinosaur.
No, and when you get all the fuzzy pictures and stuff, let's say someone does take a picture that hasn't been disproven, it could be just a tiny dinosaur, just a smaller thing, like bigger than an alligator or
Right?
whatever. Like it's still quite substantial, but not as big as people make it out to be, because we've learned through science things get smaller.
True. I've seen the movies.
It's funny. I was reading an article the other day that actually said in one of the periods, back to the mushrooms. Apparently, the planet used to just be populated by like enormous mushrooms. I thought
Oh
that's
my gosh.
like just gigantic, huge mushrooms. So, yep, everything used to be bigger. It's just the deer, the lions, like everything just used to be bigger. So it just
Right.
amuses me to think of giant mushrooms. I don't know why.
I'm surprised that animals haven't learned to eat them. Maybe it's too, you know, it's too dangerous for animals to hallucinate.
Oh no, sheep and whales eat hallucinogenic mushrooms all the time.
Sheep and who?
Whales.
How do whales get them?
No, in the country of Wales.
Oh, in Wales. Okay, I thought you said sheep
Sorry,
and
okay,
whales.
sorry. Okay, let me take it back. Okay, let me take a step back. When I lived in England, my husband's Welsh, and he grew up in Wales, so he and I remember reading articles when we were over there, when I lived over there, that there were sheep that would find these particular mushrooms and they would eat them. Um,
Oh,
they may do it elsewhere. I know they do it in Wales. That's all I'm saying.
that would be pretty trippy to watch. I mean, what does a sheep hallucinate about?
No, being naked, being not being
Ah,
having, or I don't know.
I don't know.
Oh wait, I know.
Not getting raped by farmers?
Oh, that's awful. Hey, did you ever see the movie A Million Ways to Die in the West?
Oh, probably.
Okay,
No, maybe
there's
not.
okay, so there's a giant hallucinogenic scene in the middle of the movie that has sheep with like giant long legs, like Salvador Dali legs. Maybe that's what they hallucinate about.
Maybe they hallucinate about getting even with the sheepdogs.
Yeah, seriously. Now I'm the big one.
There's an oasis in Africa where they have all of these fruit trees around the water, the little puddle of water.
Yeah,
And every season when the fruit gets ripe and it falls to the ground and it rots and it ferments and animals come from miles around uh, and party down on this rotten fruit and they get hammered every year.
I've heard that actually. Yeah, I've heard elephants and monkeys do that.
Yeah. And all of the animals, the zebras, the giraffes, they're all out there getting just plastered every year on this fruit. It's a big party, and they get hangovers. If you haven't seen some of the videos, it's some of the funniest stuff you'll ever see,
So, okay, so that's all great for land-based mammals, but I feel really sorry for the dolphins because they're obviously intelligent,
right?
and I know they have a lot of fun, but is there
But they
anything
can't
in the
get drunk, right?
like is there anything in the ocean you can get drunk on? Like, can dolphins go get drunk like monkeys can?
No, I can't think of how that would work. It's possible that some sea creature contains some hallucinogenic elements that we don't know about.
Oh, sea mushrooms. There you
Yeah,
go.
there you go, sea mushrooms.
Okay, problem solved. Next, how do dolphins have fun? Sea mushrooms. Next. Oh my
That's why
God.
they go flipping circles and stuff.
Exactly. That's why they're squeaking all the time. They're
They-
high. They're high as a kite.
Absolutely.
How do we get on this topic?
Uh, because we figured out how Rasputin was able to
Oh,
seduce the
yeah.
women.
Right. We solved that mystery, so now we moved on to other mysteries.
Right. See, he could suggest while they're high on mushrooms, could suggest that he smells good,
Oh my God. I suppose he could. Yeah. I mean,
right?
well, yeah, I don't know who it was that commented on his smell. I guess it wasn't the lady, so maybe, yeah, maybe. Apparently, I read something that said apparently he would go into the bathhouses and he would take a prostitute into the bathhouse. He would have her bathe and have sex with her, and then he would leave and not bathe himself.
Wow.
So, like, that must have been particularly unpleasant for the other patrons.
Well, so there was still and you remember he came from a peasant village. And, there was for a long time in the West the belief that bathing, would kill you, right?
Yeah, I got to get my timeline straight with that because one of the things I get asked as a medievalist a lot is, did medieval people smell? And I know they didn't. I know they bathed. So that's like the biggest myth out there. One of them is, did they drink beer because the water wasn't good? And that's no, they didn't. And there were bathhouses all over the place.
Okay.
And we know there were bathhouses in Russia because he took the prostitutes to them. So they must have looked at cleanliness as a thing, because otherwise they wouldn't have had regulated bathhouses. And the bathhouses weren't meant for prostitutes. He just took them there. They were meant for actual bathing.
Right, right.
So they must have
Well,
been
what I'm saying is that may not have been a cultural thing where he grew up,
where he came from. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I don't know. I'd have to look that up.
I mean, you had to pay to go to a bathhouse, and if you were
Yeah,
dirt poor, you couldn't do that,
you couldn't do it. No, you just jumped in a river.
right? Which
Hmm.
was covered in ice, 6 months of the year.
Yeah. You know what? I at some point in my life, I'm going to write a book about bathing habits through the centuries. And just because it's something that comes up on every single podcast for some reason I'm on. I don't know how. It must be me. That this is the only common denominator.
Fascinating. Well, I
Uh,
mean, there maybe it was more in the amongst the lower classes in the cities where people didn't bathe so much, or just lower classes, the working classes in general.
but I just it just seems weird that they would point this out about him and no one else.
Right,
So it makes him stand out.
right.
So you might have gone months over the winter, washing your face in a basin or something because it was freezing, but I just don't think you go like 6 months without bathing,
Yeah.
even
It,
even if you're there. And like I said, well, I don't know. Yeah, I suppose what you're saying is true. Your argument that it could have been his culture from where he came from, and they might have remarked on it because they didn't understand his culture. But I don't know. It just seems weird. He adapted so well to the upper echelons of society, you would have thought he would have taken on their like bathing habits.
yeah, you would kind of hope, but apparently not, huh?
Well,
I mean,
I think he thought of it as he's just so spiritual that bathing is just one of those earthly things that he's trying to cast off, and he's trying to be spiritual in like above all of everything physical. But then I don't know, you can't reconcile that with the fact that he has sex 3 or 4 times a day. So I don't know.
how
I
did,
don't
how
know.
did he have time for anything else?
Yeah, seriously, where did he get time to take all those bribes?
Right? Wow. Well, this has been fantastic.
Well, I have had a awesome time, same as last time. I love being on this show. It's hilarious.
Well, I'm glad you enjoy it, and I'm sure we will have opportunity to bring you back on. And um, I want to find out what some of your other favorites are.
Oh God. Well, if you ever want to get into medieval torture or medieval diseases, let me know. I'm sure I can come up with some nasty ways people were executed in the Middle Ages.
Oh, they were pretty creative about that, weren't they?
Oh yeah, I read just as an offshoot. I read a book from a 16th century executioner in Germany, and I read his diary. And he describes the ways that he executioners were also like torturers, like to question people.
Right?
And he goes into some detail about what he did. It's very interesting.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, we might get into that. That's
I'm
a
dang. Yeah, I'm dangling a carrot here.
I'm definitely putting that on the list.
Okay, good.
All
But
right,
yeah, I've had a great time. Thank you so much for having me on again.
thanks for being on the show, and good night, everybody.
Night.